Petr Yan's career has been an interesting one. I think that, he is clearly one of the best bantamweights in the world. There is absolutely no question about that. Just skill for skill, he can 100% contend with anybody. But you look at his career, and it's been an unfortunate one. He illegally knees Aljamain Sterling, beats Corey Sandhagen by decision, loses a razor-close decision to Aljamain Sterling, then loses a razor-close decision to Sean O'Malley. And it's like, okay, that's rough. Those are some tough pills to swallow. But, those fights were so close. He is still 1,000% in the picture. But then he got absolutely raw-dogged by Merab Dvalisvilli. And, it's rough. It's super, super rough. But, people are always rooting for him. He is making a comeback. He beat Song Yadong. And on Saturday, he had an amazing fight with Deiveson Figueiredo. Wins that one 50-45, which, look, I'll be honest. I don't know about 50-45. Yeah, I thought he definitely won. 50-45 seems a bit egregious, but look, he deserves it. He deserves it. He had some very close decisions not go his way. I don't mind that he got all the swing rounds that fight. I don't mind it, but after the fight, he calls out Merab. He calls out Merab, right? And I find it so funny that every single time somebody mentions Umar to Merab, he kind of goes, "Yeah, well, whatever the UFC wants, I'll do it. I'll fight whoever they want. I'll do it." But as soon as Petr Yan calls out Merab immediately films this entire skit. He sets a date. He starts jumping for joy. He is dying to fight Petr Yan. And look, there's a reason for this. And the reason for it is Petr Yan can never beat Merab. And again, it has nothing to do with skill. I think that Petr Yan is probably even more skillful than Merab. I don't even necessarily think it comes down to attributes either. I think that, after their initial fight, pretty much everybody was just of the mind that, wow, Merab clearly isn't human. The reason why he beat Petr Yan is because he put on a pace that was inhuman, is the word I heard described for his performance. They said it was inhuman what he did to Petr Yan. It just doesn't make any sense. His cardio is to such an extent that nobody can deal with it, and he's unbeatable for that reason. Look, Petr Yan was kind of getting overwhelmed by round 2. But then fast forward all the way to round 5, and Petr was still getting up from every single takedown. And look, no, of course, listen, he did get overwhelmed, and he did get kind of completely, what's the word for it? Merab essentially just kind of stuffed pretty much any offense Petr Yan could have because he was constantly shooting. But again, it wasn't like Petr drowned. Again, all the way down into round 5, he was still fighting. He was still getting back up. He was continuously still trying. So I don't know if I would quite say it was inhuman what Merab did. But again, it comes down to style. And let's just say Petr Yan's style is essentially a wet dream to somebody with the style of Merab. A really strong, takedown-heavy, spammy wrestler type absolutely ejaculates in their sleep thinking about Petr Yan's style. You see, Petr Yan is one of the best boxers in the division, and he does something very particular that is honestly kind of rare in MMA these days. He uses a very, very high, tight guard. Now, typically, this doesn't really work, of course, because you don't have those giant pillow gloves that can completely protect you. The small MMA gloves, it just doesn't work the same way. But what Petr Yan does so well is he always tucks his chin, both hands up. He's giving you his forehead to hit, and he's always ready to land counters off of your punches. And it is really, really nasty. And against certain opponents, this is really difficult for them to deal with. However, against Merab, against honestly anybody takedown heavy, it is a complete and utter detriment to his style. You look at the Song Yadong fight, and one thing was clear very early in that fight, and that is Petr Yan has some pretty severe PTSD from the Merab fight because he was really, really overreacting to these takedowns. Really badly, almost as bad as Jan Blachowicz' overreactions to Magomed Ankalayev's takedowns. It was bad. And it comes down to the fact that because his hands are glued to his face, because he's tucking his chin, head down, he's not ready for guys to shoot on him. That is what this all comes down to. And look, the problem is Petr always fights this way. I mean, you look at the very first Aljamain Sterling fight, and there were moments where Sterling was getting extremely deep on takedowns because of this exact reason. He moves forward with a couple of punches, Petr covers up, tucks his chin, and his legs are just right there for the taking, and Aljamain Sterling capitalizes on it. Now, the one thing that saved him particularly against Aljamain Sterling for the most part is the fact that Aljamain Sterling doesn't have a super strong shot. His grappling style is much more well-rounded. He's a lot stronger in the clinch, and of course, he has amazing top control and back takes, but he doesn't have a super strong double. So there were tons of moments where, he was getting Petr to cover up, which was allowing Aljamain Sterling to get to his hips. I mean, he has beaten him to his hips here, but again, because his shot is not super explosive, Yan still had time to react. He gets his hips back to defend. But again, you look at Merab, and that's a different story. Merab has a very good, very relentless shot. And you watch that fight over and over and over and over again. Merab would move forward with a 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. Petr covers up, tucks his chin, and boom, his legs are right there for the taking. And again, though, it wasn't like Petr was getting held down. It wasn't like he just completely drowned and, was exhausted, finished, had nothing left in the tank. No, he kept fighting over and over and over again to stand back up, but that's precisely the problem. Look, if you can just dig underhooks off your opponent's shot, right? Look, if it's a Khamzat Chimaev blast ankle pick pretty much, the underhook doesn't really matter. But against these takedowns from Merab, if Petr could have just dug 2 underhooks and hiked him up, well, then he would have stuffed the takedown early. He wouldn't have had to work ridiculously hard to get back up every time. But because he wasn't doing that, because his arms essentially were not in play in the slightest, well, then he had to keep working really, really hard the entire fight to stand back up, and that is what completely muted his game during this matchup. And I mean, look, if you're not going to be digging underhooks, you got to at least sprawl, but again, Petr just typically doesn't do that because, his entire offensive game is built upon covering up, absorbing punches, landing counters. Well, against somebody who's just going to be throwing a couple punches at a time and then shooting on you, it just doesn't work well, and that is his problem. That is his massive, massive problem. And, another big factor that really doesn't help in this regard is just the fact that Petr is not a very big 35er. I mean, look, Deiveson Figueiredo is listed at 5'5". I mean, look, heights are already kind of hooey in MMA anyway, but I can't say Petr looked much bigger than Deiveson in the slightest. And I would say Merab looked a bit wider, more dense than Petr Yan. Now, that's not necessarily a deal breaker in terms of whether you can win or not. But again, when you are grappling with someone significantly stronger than you, you have less time to react to their shots. They can manipulate you a lot quicker, so your timing has to be better. Well, again, Petr Yan, the timing he has on his takedown defense isn't great. I mean, you look at Aljamain Sterling, who doesn't necessarily have a Khamzat-esque shot. He was getting beat on these takedowns. Aljamain Sterling here is on his hips. Now, luckily, though, because of that particular matchup, he could defend. But it's not going to work the same way against Merab. The truth is, the absolute fact of the matter is, if Petr Yan wants any chance of beating Merab, he has to change up his style. He can't be covering up like he does. The problem is, that you can tell is just so ingrained into his game. I mean, you look at somebody like Israel Adesanya, who of course is a striker that has, in the past had phenomenal takedown defense. And, look, what it came down to was just distance management, right? And again, that is why Sean O'Malley beat Aljamain Sterling and Aljo couldn't get deep on any takedowns. It all comes down to distance management. It comes down to the fact that both of these guys are so good on the outside that they're seeing takedowns coming from very far away. Though, again, because Petr likes to fight in the pocket, because he likes to cover up, because he likes to stand right in front of you, because he's not necessarily tall or long or bigger than his opponents, it's just going to make facing wrestlers that much more difficult for him. Petr Yan is just not going to be the kind of guy on the outside, moving, really good footwork, difficult to pin down. That's just not his style. His style is to be more stationary. And unfortunately, that's a wrestler's wet dream, bro. That is what wrestlers dream about at night, and it makes them fucking ejaculate, is somebody just standing right in front of them, covering up where they can get clean shots on against. And again, it's just always going to be a problem for him. So, I mean, look, if Petr Yan wants any chance of beating Merab, which, look, he genuinely seems to believe that he can, he's been calling for that rematch, maybe he understands that something needs to change, because that's the big thing. He needs to change up his style. He needs to try something different. He needs to fight in a way that will allow him to manage distance better so we can see takedowns coming and defend them earlier, because if he just reapproaches the Merab fight exactly like he always does, there is zero chance he wins.